It began not with a business deal, a press release, or a click of champagne glasses, but with 5 quiet words from a little girl at a night market. "Can I hug your daughter?" Silas Rowe stood frozen. A man whose calendar had no space for chance, no column for children, no room for softness. The little girl didn't blink. Her dress was too thin for the night breeze, her ponytail frayed with adventure. And she wasn't looking for money or a selfie, just a hug. That moment, unannounced and unscripted, would unearth something in Silas, something long buried beneath penthouse silence and boardroom applause. But let's step back. Silas was 36, rich enough to be known, calculated enough to avoid being seen. The founder of a tech firm that sold human connection in digital form, he was ironically allergic to the mésances of actual humans. Employees respected him. Investors praised him. He lived in a world of catered meals and quarterly projections. A man so precise that his breakfast toast arrived with military punctuality. But he hadn't felt a real embrace since the day his mother died. So when this girl, maybe 5 or 6, approached him in that narrow alley of lanterns and food carts, everything inside him said, "Keep walking." That's what the old Silas would have done. Observe, calculate, withdraw. But something about her stilled him, and he heard himself ask, softly, "Why would you want to do that?" She looked up, round-eyed. "Because you look like a dad. And your heart looks tired." No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not even his therapists. Before he could answer, a woman appeared behind the girl, apologetic, breathless, clearly the mother. "Lila," she scolded gently. "We don't talk to strangers like that." Silas managed a smile. "It's okay. She's insightful." The woman was younger than he expected, with an expression that mixed wariness with warmth. Her name, he would later learn, was June Avery, a former art student turned street vendor. She sold handmade postcards and hand-lettered poems from a fold-out cart at the market entrance. He walked away that night with a paper card from her table. It read, "The heart remembers what the mind edits out." He didn't sleep much, not because of the girl's words or the mother's smile, but because something inside him, a muscle long unused, had twitched. The next week he returned. No driver, no assistant, no suit, just a man with something to find. The second time Silas Rowe showed up at the night market, he convinced himself it was curiosity, market research maybe, a study of human behavior. Anything but what it really was, a yearning. He didn't even pretend to browse this time. He walked with awkward purpose until he saw her again. June, folding napkins beside a tiny thermos of tea, her daughter tracing crayon doodles on paper placemats. June noticed him first, and she hesitated. He offered a quiet wave, unsure what adults were supposed to do when children changed them. "We don't bite," she said, teasing gently as he approached. "Though I can't promise she won't ask for another hug." Lila looked up, grinned, then returned to her coloring. Silas sat down at the curb near their booth. It wasn't graceful. His suit pants caught a smudge of soy sauce. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. "Do you mind if I stay a while?" he asked. "You don't seem like a man who does anything by halves," June replied. "So sure. But this is real life here. We don't have filters and PR." "I'm tired of both," he said before he could stop himself. and she nodded. Silas learned more about June that night than he had about any board member on his executive team. She had studied illustration before her scholarship was pulled. Her daughter's father was gone before Leela's first birthday. She now lived paycheck to prayer, measuring life in small kindnesses and simple truths. Silas offered to buy her dinner. She declined. "Let me keep this one moment clean," she said. "No tabs, just talk." He left with grease on his trousers and turmeric under his nails from helping cut dumplings, and a laugh he hadn't heard in years his own. The third night, he brought a folding chair. It wasn't long before the market regulars began to notice how the sharply dressed stranger kept showing up, how he didn't speak to anyone else, how he always left with soy sauce stains and crayon streaks on his cuffs. But Silas Rowe didn't care. He found something rare beneath the fairy lights and folding tables, something no algorithm could predict and no hedge fund could quantify. Still, it was a single Saturday in February when it changed from novelty to necessity. Lila was sick. The booth sat empty. And for the first time since he'd begun this new ritual, Silas felt panic. He returned the next night. Nothing. The next. Still nothing. By Wednesday, he asked a nearby vendor, an elderly man who grilled sesame cakes, if he'd seen June or her daughter. The man just shrugged and said something about children and fevers and mothers with no backup plan. Without thinking, Silas called in a favor from a private assistant he hadn't spoken to in months. It took 10 hours, but they found the apartment. It was smaller than his walk-in closet, barely furnished. But when the door opened and he saw June's exhausted face and Lila curled on the couch with a damp washcloth over her forehead, something inside him softened like wet clay. "I brought soup," he said. "You don't have to do this," June murmured, her voice thick with sleep deprivation. "I know, but I want to." And he stayed. He read Lila a bedtime story twice because she asked. He found a cracked humidifier in the closet and cleaned it. He helped June load laundry at midnight, both of them shivering on the balcony as the washer clanked rhythmically. It was never romantic. Not yet. It was realer than that. It was trust, stitched together in tiny acts. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but anchors you when the wind comes. By the next weekend, June was back at the booth. And when Lila saw Silas, she squealed, ran into his arms, and whispered, "You came back." He didn't respond right away. He was too busy trying not to cry. He just hugged her and stayed. The moment everything changed wasn't dramatic. It was a photo. A customer had snapped it at the night market. Lila fast asleep in Silas Rowe's arms, June laughing softly in the background, a paper lantern floating above them. The photo made its way to social media, then to business forums, then to the inboxes of journalists who recognized the man in the photo as the billionaire tech founder who once said in an interview, "Children are wonderful, in theory." The fallout was fast. First, his legal team called, then his board, then the press. What are you doing in a night market with a single mother and a child? One shareholder demanded during a call, "Finally learning what my company actually sells." Silas replied. The tabloids spun their stories. Some said he had an affair. Others assumed June was a paid actress. One headline read, "Silas Rowe goes rogue, adopts new family." But the truth was quieter. It was in the way Silas now walked differently. less like a man avoiding the world and more like one meeting it halfway. Still, June was nervous. "This isn't the kind of attention we want," she said, worried about Lila, the press, the whispers. "I know," Silas admitted, "but maybe it's the kind of attention we need." He offered to move them to a better neighborhood. She refused. He offered to fund her dream art studio. She paused. "If I let you help," she said slowly, "I want it to be because I'm choosing it, not because I feel I owe you." Silas understood that, so he helped her register the studio in her name, then disappeared from the spotlight. No press release, no donation plaque. Just 2 months later, he showed up at her new storefront on opening day with a box of crayons and a mug that read, "Best Artist Ever." She laughed and cried at the same time. Lila drew a picture of all three of them standing under a giant orange sun. Silas pinned it to the studio wall without a frame because not everything needed polishing. Time passed not as a blur, but in sharp, specific memories. Lila lost her first tooth and insisted on giving it to Silas because he was richer than the tooth fairy. June's studio began hosting free art classes for kids, and Silas quietly covered the supply costs without ever mentioning it. Every Sunday became their ritual: pancakes, drawing, long walks to nowhere. But even happiness has shadows. One night, Silas stood in the doorway of Lila's room, watching her sleep. June joined him, quiet. "You're important to her," she whispered. He looked down. "She saved me." June smiled, eyes soft. "You know, you could stay. Not as a visitor, not as a helper. Just stay." It terrified him, not because he didn't want to, but because it meant letting go of the old armor of the man who believed his worth was tied to board meetings and zeros on a screen. He didn't answer then, but the next morning he showed up with a backpack and an apology for being late to pancakes, and that was how they began again. It wasn't perfect. There were bad days. One time, Lila melted down in a grocery store, and Silas didn't know what to do. Another, June got overwhelmed and locked herself in the bathroom just to breathe. But they learned, together. One evening, Silas sat with Lila on the porch as she painted. "Do you miss being the man who built things?" she asked out of nowhere. He considered. "I still build things," he said, "just different ones now." Lila nodded, wise beyond her years. "Then maybe I'll be one of your best things." He didn't say anything. He just pulled her close. Eventually, June joined them with tea, sitting silently beside him. And for the first time in his life, Silas Rowe knew that legacy had nothing to do with towers or tech or television features. It lived in quiet porches. In sticky crayon hands. In questions asked under orange skies.